stars above, and you said, where you gonna run to and where you gonna hide if you've got love for yourself?
Our next speaker is Dr. Sharat G. He is a research fellow and past president of the San Jose Peace and Justice Center. He writes and lectures on global political economy, labor migration, social movements, and public health. A year ago, he delivered a long overdue apology from the American people to the Japanese people for the U.S. atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki at rousing mass rallies in both cities. A medical radiation scientist by training, he has connections to the nuclear energy programs in Iran and India, providing him with inside knowledge of the decision-making behind those programs. His insights on the nuclear calculations of Iran and North Korea are reinforced by personal visits to these countries and provide a clear vision for denuclearization. Please welcome Dr. Sharat G.
Well, thank you very much, Julia, and thank you to everyone who has put so much work into organizing this annual event. It's really amazing. 1 year ago today, I was in Hiroshima, and the organizers of some of the events gave me this sign to march with. And what I was very impressed by in Hiroshima and also in Nagasaki was not that they were simply an event, commemorating and mourning, of course, the dropping of the atomic bomb on each of these cities. And on Nagasaki, it was August 9th. But that there were so many groups. There were all kinds of activities by different organizations, by religious groups, by secular groups, by labor unions, by political parties, by the government, local government, national government, recognizing the tragedy of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by our government. I went there to give this apology because no U.S. president has been willing to make an apology for the U.S. bombing of these cities. And I want to remind you that this was a first use. This was a preemptive first use of nuclear weapons, which was actually so unnecessary. We are always told that, it ended the war more quickly, but in reality, it was unnecessary because Emperor Hirohito was ready to surrender under conditions that the institution of the emperor be preserved, and he made that offer in June. It was communicated to Stalin. Stalin communicated it to Truman, but Truman went ahead because he wanted to prove that the United States was the superpower, the only power that could use the nuclear, that could surprise the world with this nuclear weapon, and would also preempt the entry of the Soviet Union into the war against Japan. So that's why it was so necessary to give that apology from the American people. I want to talk a little bit today about a few other things. There are two other nuclear confrontations going on as we speak. One of them is with the U.S. and North Korea. And of course, the announced objective of the United States is to denuclearize North Korea. Now that's a huge contradiction because, I do favor the denuclearization of North Korea, but it's a huge contradiction because as we speak, this country is engaged in a program of upgrading its nuclear weapons. Okay, we already, along with Russia, have the largest number of nuclear weapons on Earth, and This was announced, by the way, this is regardless of political party, this was announced by President Obama, was $1 trillion program over 30 years. That's $1 trillion to upgrade the U.S. nuclear arsenal over a 30-year period. So it's absolutely hypocritical for this country to call on other countries to denuclearize when we are in fact increasing the power of our nuclear arsenal. The other thing that's important about North Korea to understand is why have the negotiations stalled? And it's basically because the United States has this unreasonable insistence that North Korea fully denuclearize and then the U.S. will lift sanctions. And it does not even talk about the other factors such as a peace treaty, replacing the armistice with a peace treaty, which would officially end the Korean War, and diplomatic recognition of North Korea, because we have not had diplomatic relations with that country since its birth. So North Koreans, on the other hand, say that because there's so much mistrust between the two sides, this can only take place in phases. So in other words, each side has to commit to making a small step, and this would build confidence. And it's a long process to denuclearize, it's a long process to lift all the sanctions, but if this were done step by step, with both sides taking small steps, we could certainly reach a successful conclusion of the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, as well as bringing North Korea back into the community of nations. The other flashpoint is Iran. And Iran has of course faced a relentless, not just isolation, but a relentless escalation of U.S. sanctions. And I want to remind you that when the United States applies sanctions, because the United States has the U.S. dollar, those sanctions really have the impact of international sanctions. So when the U.S. declares sanctions, it really bites. And ever since the Iranian Revolution in 1979, the United States has been forever escalating these sanctions and adding new entities, new persons in Iran to the sanctions list. And so Iran's only alternative is how does Iran break out of these sanctions? It has to make some kind of a statement. Now, I don't particularly support the approach of nuclear weapons, but Iran has not actually. There's no clear evidence that Iran is actually engaged in a program of nuclear weapons development. No international agency has been able to certify that. Iran has a nuclear program. I happen to have been a college mate of the man, Dr. Ali Akbar Salehi, who is the head of the Iranian nuclear program. So I know something about what he is thinking, and he was educated here in the United States at MIT, and he has a very modern approach, and what he's looking for is for Iran to become to develop a nuclear energy program. And so Iran is the Russians have helped build a nuclear reactor at Bushehr, and so the primary purpose of that program is nuclear energy. Even so, there's the sort of the threat of the ability to develop nuclear weapons is there, but it's mainly as a negotiating point in the same way that North Korea is using nuclear weapons as a negotiating point because of the relentless sanctions, the relentless attempt to isolate each of these countries. And so the solution to this is for the United States to end the sanctions. Iran has actually been on our side in the fight against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and And if we bring Iran back into the community of nations, we can work with it in furthering peace in the Middle East. And there's all kinds of demonization charges that are made consistently by our government against Iran. I don't fully agree with the government of Iran, but it is a country of almost 90 million people, and it's time to bring them back to diplomatically recognize that country, to end the animosities that came about in 1979 with the hostage crisis, and to work with these countries in the community of nations and towards peace. And I want to finally reiterate an overall commitment that we must all recommit ourselves to, which is universal nuclear disarmament. Universal nuclear disarmament. That is the only way forward for humanity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sharat.
I wanna let down my sword and shield inside of Liverpool, yeah. Inside of Liverpool, yeah. Inside of Liverpool, I wanna let down my sword and shield inside of Liverpool. I wanna study